Just do you believe the New Testament has contradictions?
Depends on what you mean by contradiction.
A and not A.
Yeah, so ultimately, I think there are very, very minor ones, like what color are Jesus's robes. Outside of that, no.
All right. What do you consider Mark 16:8 a minor one? And then a verse from Luke that would say the exact opposite.
Mark 16:8. So the women left the tomb, ran away trembling, bewildered, and in fear did not say a word to anyone.
Yeah.
Okay, and where's the contradiction?
Luke 24, verse 9.
Luke 24, verse 9. That says, and when they returned from the tomb, they reported all these things to the 11 and all the others. Yeah, I don't think this is a contradiction, because if you go up, um, what does the angel say for them to do?
Go tell the others.
Go tell the others.
Yeah, and then it says ran away and said nothing to anyone. They didn't
Yeah,
say anything.
yeah. So I think it's probably just in the heat of the moment, right? They just didn't say anything to anyone in that one. But if you continue in the mark, that part that's removed, right? They do get revelation. They do talk. They have all these things. And if you also go to 1 Corinthians 15:3, what does that say? The earliest text.
Well, I'm on my phone. If I get off, is this like TikTok?
No, I'll pull it up.
1 Corinthians 15. Oh, is the 500 passage of the 500?
No,
First, he appeared
not.
to.
Well, that's in there, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So 1 Corinthians 15:3, for what I received that passed on you is first importance, that Christ died for his sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried and raised on the dead according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas. Who's Cephas?
Peter,
Right, good. And to the 12. Who was she supposed to reveal himself to in Mark?
the 12.
Peter and the 12.
Okay.
Right. So we have Peter and the 12, and then in 1 Corinthians, an earlier text says they revealed himself to Peter and the 12, and then Luke, again, one says they revealed himself to Peter and the 12. So I think what we have here is an argument of silence. You're assuming that they just never spoke to anyone ever about it. I think it's just talking about it within the moment. But if we're talking about a hypothesis, we have three texts that all say they revealed. Well, actually, if we include the other Gospels, we'd have more. It says it was revealed to Peter and to the 12. So if we're looking at historical probabilities, it seems like more likely that what Mark is talking about is was revealed to Peter and the 12.
Okay. Yeah, you have to add it on after because when Mark says you got to go.
If you're only taking a hyper literal reading of the text, because just think about it, just think about it in the context, right? Mark is written to be a spoken word, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Oral tradition.
it's been meant to be oral tradition. And if they're walking around telling these people what happened, how did they hear about it?
Right. They were told by others.
Well, who would had to have told them?
It doesn't say.
Well,
Paul
who
doesn't even
went to the
say.
empty tomb? Who was a witness to the empty tomb?
Paul doesn't even. That was added.
Who went? I'm just, let's say Mark ends right where it supposedly ends, and it doesn't keep going, right at verse 9 or verse 8. Sorry, if
verse 8,
that's
yeah.
where it ends, and Mark is the first gospel, and it's written so people could hear it, and I'm walking around and I'm preaching Mark and I'm giving it as a spoken word, how did I hear of it?
From other people.
Who are the other people that told me?
That's the thing. It depends which gospel you read.
No.
The
I'm
women
just saying
according.
Mark is the
Oh,
first
just
gospel.
Mark. Just Mark.
Mark exists, right?
Okay, just Mark.
It's being spread around, right? Luke hasn't been written yet. Matthew
Correct.
hasn't been written yet. John hasn't, and Mark, the person who wrote Mark, is walking around telling the story of Mark. How did they hear of the empty tomb?
Oh, it had to the only from Mark's perspective, the only people who saw it or heard about it were the women.
So
So
what is the logical conclusion? Because right off the bat, you would have everything thrown out the window. And I don't think Mark is stupid enough to say, well, they didn't tell anybody. Because first thing somebody is going to come up and walk up and be like, well, how do you know? How do you know
yeah.
Jesus rose from the dead if they didn't tell anybody?
Well, that's an easy problem. I mean, Jesus could have just appeared to Peter and then the 12
Well, okay, but
without the women.
now are you accepting the later addition to Mark?
I'm not accepting the later edition.
Okay, so if you're not accepting the later edition, that's not said in there. So
That's not what?
how would he have known? Because remember, he's walking around, he's telling people, he stops the verse, he stops it right here. So the women left the tomb, ran away trembling and bewildered, and in their fear they did not say a word to anyone.
Right.
So he stopped, that's the end, right? So I give you that verse, I say that to you, you're gonna walk up to me and be like, well, how do you know?
I don't think I'm following. I'm sorry. I don't really understand that.
I don't know. Okay. I let's say I'm Mark. I just
Yeah.
I spoke all of Mark, right?
Correct.
I'm at the end. I sit there, I say, the very last thing I say. So the women left the tomb and
Hello?
ran away trembling and bewildered. And in their fear, they did not say a word to anyone. What's going to be the first question you're going to ask me?
How did you find out?
Right? If the only witnesses didn't tell anyone, then how would I know?
Somebody had to tell you. That's one way.
Right, but those somebodies would had to have seen it.
An empty tomb. Yeah.
So for somebody to tell me the tomb was empty, they would have to see the tomb. But the only witnesses who saw the tomb apparently didn't tell anybody.
Right. Well, Mark doesn't say they're the only witnesses who saw the empty tomb, but
Okay, so you're allowed.
People.
So hold on, that's the thing. You're allowed to insert what ifs and maybes, but when I insert a what if and maybe, it's not that way, right? Because I don't think it. Like I said, I don't think because of the evidence. I don't think because of the historical evidence that they're most likely talking about. It just didn't tell me. I think they ran away in fear, and in the moment they didn't say anything because they were afraid. Then they probably revealed it to them later.
Yeah, that could have happened. That could have.
Yeah,
happened.
I think considering what all the other gospels say, considering what was said just before them, and considering what Paul says in his epistles, that's the highest probability. It's not a contradiction. I think that's just the highest probability.
I agree that that's the highest probability, because how else are you going to spread the word? I do think that's a good point, but that doesn't take away from that doesn't take away from Mark. Why would Mark even say that at all? That's the Mark. It seems Mark disagrees with the other gospels. Whether
right, I've already answered that question. You just agreed with me, so why are you bringing up the contention again? You just said that's the highest probability, so why bring it up again?
Because even if you had the highest probability, it doesn't take away the contradiction.
It does take away the contradiction.
Okay.
Because again, you're assuming this has an exhaustive narrative to it. Right. So, for example, when in I forget which one of the epistles, it says nobody has done good. Is that true? Is not a single person done good?
According to the Bible, well, according to there, no. According to other parts of the Bible, yes.
Well, so again, that only follows if you take a hyper literalism way of reading things. So if I say to you right now, I told a joke to my wife and it killed her. What do you what do you assume happened?
Correct. Figurative language, hyperbole.
Right. And the Bible has lots of figurative language, hyperbole, things like that. Now, self-contained, I agree. It seems like a contradiction. But when you look at all the historical context, I don't see a contradiction. Because again, right before it says, the angel says, go reveal yourself to Cephas and the 12. And then all the other gospel says he was revealed to Cephas in the 12. And then Paul's epistle, the earliest epistle, says it was revealed to Cephas in the 12. So my logical conclusion is she revealed it to Cephas in the 12.
Yeah. You're putting together the pieces of the puzzles, according to all the authors put together.
Well, that's how you do. That's how you do history.
Good. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I don't think this is a contradiction.
They're not connected, but I don't want to go in circles. I agree with everything you just said, but that last
no. What I'm saying is when
follow.
Mark is saying this, he's not using it exhaustively. It's only a contradiction if he intended to use it exhaustively. That's what I'm trying. That's my argument I'm bringing. Is when he says, "So the women left the tomb, ran away trembling and bewildered, and in their fear they did not say a word to anyone." I do not think he's using that exhaustively.
Right.
You're saying it's an exhaustive reading of the text. I don't.
Yeah, the only reason I say it's exhaustive is because that is the original ending of Mark. If it was not the original ending, and what follows after
Right,
isn't all.
but again, if I'm Mark and I'm telling that story, the first question people are going to ask is what? How do you know? So Mark obviously would have known that, right, when he's writing it. They didn't tell anyone. And somebody's going to come up, well, how do you know, Mark? And Mark's going to say, well, because they told me.
Yeah, the message spread. They could have told you. That's one possibility. Another possibility, according to Paul, who doesn't have an empty tomb story, is that he appeared to Cephas himself, and then Cephas spread it to everyone else. So the woman just saw the empty tomb and ran away, and Jesus could have just appeared to Cephas, and then that's how it spread. That's another possibility. So we don't. I mean, we don't have Mark in front of us, but
Right. I don't see any reason. You can bring hypotheses forward, but you have to give me an accumulative case on why I have to take that hypothesis. Right. I gave you an accumulated case on why my hypothesis has higher probability. Like we can give any hypothesis we want. That doesn't mean that it's likely.
I know. You compare your hypotheses, which is the most likely. But even if you have the most likely hypotheses, if you have different historical records of World War II, and you're constructing what most likely happened, you can still have different historians. You can still have different sources disagreeing with each other of certain words that like certain generals
Yeah,
say.
I don't know why any of this is relevant.
Right, because you're constructing. If you construct a historical narrative, you could still have contradictions and still have they're two different things. Constructing what actually
Right.
happened
I don't think this is
versus
a contradiction, but I already admitted to you earlier that I do think there's minor contradictions in there. I
Sure.
don't think
Okay.
this is one of them. So I don't know why you're really driving this home. Like you really want to win that this is a contradiction. Okay, let me say I grant it to you there's a contradiction. So what?
Okay.
This is not a theological. It doesn't change anything theologically. It doesn't change the narrative. It just means Mark misunderstood or got something wrong.
Yeah, I agree. You know what? You're right. And even if it is a contradiction, that does not debunk the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.